The naval base was alive before dawn, its giant floodlights painting the steel decks in hard white against the Pacific sky. Salt hung in the air, carried by the restless wind that tugged at uniforms and whistled through open hatches. Sailors moved in lines, their boots clanging in rhythm across the deck plates. Orders barked over radios, collided with the roar of forklifts hauling crates. This was no routine morning. The fleet was preparing for the largest live-fire exercise of the year, a test meant to prove the Navy's strike readiness in the eyes of allies and potential adversaries alike. Petty Officer Carla Reyes stood near the missile-loading bay, her sleeves rolled neatly, her coveralls already streaked with sweat. She moved with deliberate precision, guiding a crane's cables as a crate, the size of a small car, lowered onto a launcher rail. Inside the armored container lay a Tomahawk missile, one of dozens that would be hoisted into position before the day ended. Reyes didn't flinch at the groan of metal or the sudden lurch of the load. Her eyes stayed on the task, calm, unhurried, certain. Most sailors around her blended into the collective rhythm of the crew shouting, moving, hustling, to keep pace with the grueling schedule. Reyes was different. She worked with a quietness that drew no attention, yet her efficiency left no wasted motion. Her hands, small but strong, locked clamps into place faster than sailors twice her size. She had the kind of discipline born not from orders alone, but from an inner drive to leave no room for error. Lives, she knew, depended on how these missiles were handled. From the command walkway above the deck, Admiral Thomas Hawley paced slowly, his eyes sweeping across the chaos. Below, Hawley was a man who had spent 3 decades at sea, his skin weathered by salt and sun, his presence commanding even without a word. He knew this rhythm well, the orchestra of machines, the anxious determination of sailors, the undercurrent of nerves that always accompanied a major operation. Usually nothing surprised him anymore, but today something did. His gaze caught on one sailor petty officer Reyes. At first, it was nothing more than the way she worked, fluid and focused, out of step with the frantic pace of those around her. But then his eyes narrowed. On her right shoulder, stitched into her uniform, where only regulation insignia should be, was a patch. It wasn't the standard squadron emblem or ship's crest. This one was unfamiliar, a sharp eagle split by a jagged lightning bolt, embroidered in deep blue and silver thread. Hale's stride slowed. For a moment, the noise of the deck seemed to fade. He knew Navy regulations with the kind of instinct that came from a lifetime of enforcement. Uniforms were uniform for a reason. Every patch carried meaning training. Schools, warfare qualifications, command assignments. Unauthorized insignia were forbidden, yet Reyes wore hers openly, as though daring someone to notice. And Hawley, by chance or fate, had noticed. He forced his expression to remain neutral, unwilling to reveal his interest. His boots clicked along the walkway, his hands clasped behind his back, the image of authority inspecting his crew. But inside, his thoughts spun. That symbol, it stirred something buried deep in memory. He had seen it once, long ago, not on a uniform, but in a classified briefing folder marked Eyes Only. A folder tied to a program whose name wasn't supposed to be spoken aloud outside secure walls. Reyes continued working, oblivious to his watch. She secured the crate, checked the tension on the cables, then motioned for the crane operator to lift. Her voice, calm but firm, carried above the noise. Steady. Keep her level. The sailors around her obeyed, without hesitation, trusting. Her tone, the missile slid smoothly into position, locking with a heavy clang. Reyes double-checked the seals before giving a crisp nod. Another Tomahawk ready. Another piece of America's arsenal prepared for deployment. Hawley exhaled slowly. His instincts told him this was no accident. A sailor didn't wear a patch like that unless it meant something. And for Hale, the meaning was dangerous. He remembered the Whisper's Project Thunderbird, an experimental unit buried so deep in the Navy's records, most officers had never heard of it. Specialists in cyber operations, electronic warfare, and intelligence missions that blurred the line between military and espionage. Officially, the project had been shuttered years ago. Unofficially, who knew? If Reyes was connected to Thunderbird, what was she doing here, among loaders and deckhands, sweating under the Pacific sun while moving crates of missiles? Hale knew the Navy buried secrets in plain sight sometimes. He had seen operatives disguised as engineers, analysts, even cooks. But this placing one in the missile bay of his fleet was unsettling. The Admiral leaned on the railing, watching her longer than he should have. Reyes must have felt it, because for a brief second she looked up. Her eyes met his, dark, unreadable, calm. She didn't smile, didn't flinch, didn't offer the nervous salute most sailors would. She simply held his gaze, then looked back to her work. The movement was subtle, but Hale caught it, the stiffening of her shoulders, the tightening of her jaw. She knew he had seen the patch. A moment passed quickly. Another officer called for Hale's attention, pointing toward a readiness report. He nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. He walked off the deck, but the image of the patch stayed with him, vivid and unresolved. It wasn't just a keepsake, he was sure of that. It was a marker, a shadow stitched onto fabric, a secret carried openly yet invisible to most. As he entered the operations center, Hale kept replaying the thought. Why here? Why now? A fleet exercise was important, but it wasn't the kind of mission that warranted hidden operatives. Unless someone expected trouble. Unless someone already knew the enemy would test them not with torpedoes or missiles, but with something invisible, something that could cripple ships before they fired a shot. Cyber attacks, sabotage, espionage, all of it fell under Thunderbird's old portfolio. He dismissed the thought for the moment, forcing his attention back to official matters. But as the day wore on, Hale found his gaze drifting back toward the missile bay whenever reports scrolled across his desk. Each time he pictured Reyes, steady among the chaos, that lightning-split eagle gleaming faintly under fluorescent lights. He didn't know who she really was, not yet. But Hale had learned to trust instinct over paperwork. And his instinct told him this. Petty Officer Carla Reyes wasn't simply loading Tomahawks. She was something else entirely. And sooner or later, he would find out what. Admiral Thomas Hale had learned long ago that the smallest details often carried the largest weight. In battle, it could be the flicker of an enemy radar on a screen, the hesitation in a pilot's voice, or the sliver of movement on an otherwise calm horizon. On land, within the endless bureaucracy of the Navy, details came in different forms. A missing report, a line redacted too heavily, a face that appeared in the background of a photo where it didn't belong. Now, that detail was a patch. A lightning bolt across an eagle, sitting on the shoulder of a sailor who was supposed to be ordinary. Back in his quarters, Hale poured himself a black coffee, the bitter aroma filling the dimly lit room. He set the mug down and pulled a leather-bound notebook from the top drawer of his desk. Unlike most admirals, Hale still jotted fragments of memory and suspicion in ink. He trusted paper more than he trusted networks. Networks could be hacked. Paper could be locked away. He flipped open the notebook and drew the patch from memory. Wings spread wide, a jagged bolt slashing downward, stitching a deep blue that suggested secrecy rather than pride. He stared at it for a long moment, his hand resting against his jaw. Where had he seen it before? He leaned back, closing his eyes. The memory surfaced slowly, like an object rising from dark water. 7 years earlier, Washington, a briefing. Room inside the Pentagon, with blinds drawn and guards outside the door. He had been a captain then, not yet carrying the weight of stars on his shoulders. The room had been filled with admirals, generals, and civilians whose badges bore no service branch. The kind of men and women who never introduced themselves, but somehow had clearance above everyone else. A projector flickered. Slides appeared. Among them was a symbol, the very one now stitched to Petty Officer Ray's shoulder. Project Thunderbird, the briefer had said, his voice steady. Clinical. Cyber Electronic Operations Unit. Naval Command, black budget, cross-agency integration. The rest of the briefing was hazy now. What Hawley remembered most was the tone. The implication that Thunderbird operated in places even the military rarely admitted existed. Hacking foreign systems. Disabling enemy weapons before they fired. Embedding operatives where no one expected them. In the shadows of fleets, in consulates, sometimes even within allied governments. The program had been controversial. Too aggressive, some argued. Too invisible. And then, 2 years later, it was gone. Quietly disbanded, or so the official line went. Hawley hadn't thought about Thunderbird in years. Until now. He opened his laptop, typing Rhea's name into the secure personnel database. Her record appeared quickly. Petty Officer. Second Class Carla Reyes, enlisted at 19 Service Record Exemplary. He scrolled. Awards for conduct, efficiency, teamwork. Nothing unusual at first glance. Then, as he reached her assignments, he froze. 2 years were redacted. Entire blocks of text replaced with black bars. Dates listed only as classified. Operations. Even for an admiral, the page stopped cold. He tapped the screen, irritated. What the hell were you doing, Reyes? A knock sounded at his door. Hawley closed the laptop with deliberate calm. Enter. His aide, Commander Ricks, stepped in with a stack of readiness reports. Sir, missile loading is on schedule. We'll be ready for the live exercise within 48 hours. Good, Hawley said curtly. He accepted the papers, but his mind wasn't on them. Anything unusual on the deck? Any sailors stand out to you? Ricks frowned, surprised by the question. Stand out, sir? Not particularly. They're running a tight operation. Why do you ask? Hawley shook his head. No reason. Dismissed. When the door shut again, Hawley exhaled slowly. He knew better than to share his suspicions yet. If Thunderbird still existed, discussing it with anyone outside that circle was a mistake. Still, the question burned. Why bury a Thunderbird operative in his fleet under the guise of a missile loader? That night, Hawley called in a favor. He picked up a secure phone, dialing a number from memory. After 3 rings, a gravelly voice answered. Marcus Hawley. It's been a long time. Too long, Paul, Hawley said. I need a memory check. Do you recall a program called Thunderbird? A long pause on the other end. Then a low chuckle. I recall being told never to say that name again. I saw a patch today, Hawley continued. Eagle Lightning Bolt. On the uniform of a sailor in my command. Race, Carla? The chuckle stopped. Silence stretched. Finally, the voice grew sharper. If she's wearing that, Marcus, she isn't just a sailor. You know that. Thunderbird was shut down. Programs like that are never shut down. They just move. Change shape. Slip into shadows until they're needed. Needed for what? Hawley pressed. Another pause. If she's in your fleet, someone expects trouble. And they expect it where you won't see it coming. The line went dead. Hawley sat motionless, the receiver heavy in his hand. The next morning, he made a deliberate choice. He would confront Reyes directly. Not with accusations, no. That would be reckless, but with questions. Questions she might answer not with words, but with the subtle tells that trained operatives couldn't entirely hide. On the deck, sailors moved in their usual rhythm, cranes groaning, missiles sliding into position. Hale's boots echoed as he approached. Reyes was there, crouched beside a loading rail, checking a seal. Her hair was tucked neatly beneath her cap, her hands steady on the clamps. "Petty Officer Reyes," Hale said evenly. She looked up. "Sir." His eyes flicked to her shoulder. The patch was still there, bold in its defiance of regulations. "Where'd you get that patch?" he asked casually. Her face didn't change, but her body betrayed her. For the briefest instant, her fingers froze against the metal. A heartbeat later, she resumed tightening the clamp. "Just a keepsake, Admiral. Old crew emblem. Nothing official." Her tone was calm, respectful, but Hale heard what wasn't said. The patch wasn't a keepsake. She knew he knew it wasn't, and she had chosen not to lie convincingly, but not to tell the truth either. "Carry on, Petty Officer," Hale said. She nodded, returning to her work as though nothing had passed between them. But Hale walked away with his suspicions confirmed. Reyes was no ordinary sailor. As he returned to the command walkway, he felt the weight of the discovery settle on him. His fleet was about to enter the most high-profile exercise of the year. Dozens of ships, hundreds of missiles, all eyes watching from every angle. And hidden among his sailors was someone carrying the ghost of a program that wasn't supposed to exist. He had seen the detail. He could not unsee it now. And details, he knew, were where wars were won or lost. Admiral Thomas Hale sat alone in his office, the hum of the base behind closed doors fading into a low, constant drone. The morning sun slanted through blinds, casting stripes across the polished deck below. Coffee sat cold on his desk, untouched. Hale's attention was fixed on the laptop in front of him, the cursor hovering over the personnel file of Petty Officer Carla Reyes. He scrolled slowly, deliberately, as though moving too fast might break some hidden code. Her record was impressive. At first glance, enlisted at 19, perfect attendance, awards for conduct, efficiency, and teamwork. Nothing unusual. Every entry seemed routine. Yet something gnawed at him. He had seen thousands of service records in his career. Most had holes, small gaps, or transfers, but nothing like this. 2 entire years of her career were blanked out, replaced by thick, blacked-out blocks that even his clearance couldn't penetrate. Hale's fingers tapped the desk in a rhythm of frustration and curiosity. Classified operations. Joint intelligence. He couldn't read the details, but the placement of the redactions told him all he needed to know. Reyes had been on missions so secret that even admirals were supposed to remain ignorant. That patch lightning splitting an eagle's wings was no trivial emblem. It belonged to a program that specialized in operations where ordinary sailors or officers were either a liability or irrelevant. He leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment. Thunderbird. That name floated into his memory like smoke through a cracked window. It had been years since he last heard it, and even then it was whispered in the shadows of classified briefings. Experts in cyber warfare, sabotage, electronic countermeasures, and infiltration. Operatives placed in positions where no one would suspect them. People who could move through a fleet, an embassy, or even a foreign command with anonymity, yet possessed the ability to change outcomes at the highest level. And now one was on his deck. Hale's mind raced, trying to understand the purpose of placing Reyes here, disguised as a missile loader. It didn't make sense strategically. A live fire exercise, although critical for training, was not inherently a target for covert operations, unless someone expected it to be. The thought that someone had anticipated trouble here made the hairs on the back of his neck rise. He recalled the moment on the deck when he first noticed the patch, the way her eyes met his for a fraction of a second, calm and unreadable. That moment replayed in his mind like a film loop. He had asked casually where it came from. Her answer had been plausible but incomplete. Just a keepsake, she said, yet her hands had betrayed her slight pause. She had known he saw. Hale rubbed his forehead, a habit when thoughts refused to settle. If she had been part of Thunderbird, why bury her among ordinary sailors? What mission had placed her here, under his command, with no warning? And more importantly, who had authorized it? He needed more context, more pieces of the puzzle. He pulled open a secure terminal and requested her service record in greater detail, filtering through every accessible node, every cross-reference to past deployments. He found small clues, references to Pacific Joint exercises, coded mentions of surveillance operations, training programs that no ordinary sailor attended. Each reference was fleeting, obscure, almost deliberately hidden in plain sight. Hale's pulse quickened. Someone had designed her career path to erase visibility, yet leave traces for those who knew what to look for. The phone on his desk rang, a muted, secure line. Hale answered, keeping his voice measured. Hale here. The voice on the other end was calm, practiced. Sir, I heard you were reviewing Petty Officer Reyes' file. Hale stiffened slightly. Who's this? An old colleague, the voice said. Call me Marcus. His tone carried the weight of someone who had seen far too much. I don't know what you found, but if you've seen the patch, you need to be careful. She's not what she seems. I know, Hale said flatly, but I need to know why she's here, and why someone placed her in my fleet. There was silence. Then Marcus spoke, measured and deliberate. Programs like Thunderbird don't retire. They just shift, relocate, and wait. The fleet is a convenient hiding place, safe from public scrutiny, yet close enough to respond if needed. If she's here, she was placed with intent. Someone expects something, or wants something to remain. Unseen? Hale hung up slowly, the words echoing in his mind. His instincts screamed that Reyes was a linchpin in a plan he didn't fully understand. He could feel the tension in his shoulders, the undercurrent of danger hidden beneath the routine hum of the base. He stood and moved toward the window, watching the sailors below. The cranes lifted crates of missiles into position with mechanical precision. The hum of activity masked the fact that one of the people moving among them was not just a loader, not just another sailor, but a trained operative with a history hidden from everyone, even him. Rey's movements were deliberate, confident, and utterly ordinary. She smiled at a junior sailor who tripped over a cable, offered instructions with polite firmness, then returned to her work. Hale felt a strange mix of admiration and unease. Her effectiveness was undeniable, but her secrecy was unsettling. He had spent decades commanding personnel, yet this level of hidden expertise was almost terrifying. He recalled a similar pattern in his career. Operatives embedded so deeply that even their commanders didn't realize the risk or the value until it was too late. Hale had learned to trust instinct over paperwork, and his instinct was clear. Reyes wasn't where she belonged by accident. The day continued, and Hale observed her closely, mentally mapping her every move. She checked torque settings, confirmed inventory logs, communicated quietly with the crane operators. Each action was precise, efficient, unremarkable, yet every detail confirmed her competence, her discipline, and above all, her hidden capabilities. He noted how her eyes constantly scanned the deck, not for mistakes, but for patterns, anomalies, threats. She was watching the environment, not just participating in it. Lunch break came, but Hale didn't leave. He watched as Reyes quietly ate from her tray, never taking her eyes off the deck for long. Observing her behavior, Halle realized something profound. She had trained herself to remain invisible while retaining total awareness. That skill wasn't taught in basic training. That skill was survival. The Admiral finally returned to his office, his mind a whirlwind. He poured another coffee, sipped it without tasting, then opened the secure notebook again. He wrote, "Petty Officer Race, not ordinary. Patch confirms Thunderbird. Placed in fleet with intent. Unknown mission. Verify origin. Observe. Do not interfere, but do not ignore." The words felt inadequate, but they were the best he could do. He was beginning to understand the complexity of the situation, but the full picture remained elusive. Who had ordered her placement? What was she protecting or watching for? And why had this program, thought long defunct, resurfaced quietly under his command? Hours later, as the sun began to lower over the horizon, Halle finally allowed himself to breathe. He knew he couldn't confront her yet, couldn't demand explanations that might compromise a mission or violate protocol. All he could do was observe, gather evidence, and prepare for the possibility that the next move would not be routine. On the deck below, the cranes lifted another missile into place. Reyes crouched beside it, tightening bolts with steady hands. She paused for a heartbeat, glanced at a junior sailor for reassurance, then turned her gaze upward, almost imperceptibly, toward Hale's office. He felt her awareness, even from above, and understood that she had seen him long before he truly noticed her. The patch on her shoulder was not an invitation to inquiry. It was a statement, a symbol of authority and expertise hidden beneath. Ordinary cover, a quiet signal that even the Admiral could not yet fully decipher. And for Halle, that realization was as thrilling as it was terrifying. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the deck in shades of orange and steel gray. Lights flickered on. The base was alive with motion, sound, and anticipation for the exercise to come. And somewhere in the midst of the ordinary, Petty Officer Carla Reyes continued her work, unaware of how closely she had been observed, yet fully aware of the weight her presence carried. Halle sat back, eyes fixed on the patch, and whispered to himself, "This is only the beginning." Admiral Thomas Howell waited in his office, the low hum of the fleet below a muted backdrop to his thoughts. He had spent the morning reviewing every scrap of information available on Petty Officer Carla Reyes, yet the more he learned, the less he seemed to know. Her record was flawless, her demeanor ordinary, and yet those blacked-out sections told a story of secrecy and skill that no ordinary sailor possessed. 2 years of classified operations, one patch on her shoulder, and a presence on his deck that suddenly made every routine procedure feel layered with hidden intent. He drummed his fingers lightly on the edge of the desk, weighing his approach. He needed answers, but he had to tread carefully. Reyes was trained. He was certain of it. That patch wasn't decorative. It was a signal. One misstep and any attempt to probe her background could be misinterpreted or worse, compromise something he wasn't yet aware of. He drew a deep breath and waited for the right moment. By midday, the deck below hummed with the usual activity of cranes, forklifts, and the shuffle of boots. Halle finally called her in. Reyes entered without hesitation, her posture straight, hands clasped neatly in front of her. She looked every bit the disciplined sailor, calm, composed, unreadable. But Hale's eyes immediately returned to the patch. He wondered briefly if she realized how clearly he had noticed it yesterday. "Petty Officer Reyes," Halle began, keeping his voice steady, careful not to alarm her. "I wanted to talk to you about your record." Her expression remained calm. "Controlled, sir?" she asked, as though unsure where this conversation was heading. Halle gestured toward a chair, but she stayed standing. I've been reviewing your service history. 2 years are heavily redacted. Missions listed only as classified joint operations. Your experience goes far beyond your current assignment. She did not flinch. Not even the faintest twitch. Betrayed recognition. Her lips pressed into a line, but she did not respond immediately. Halle studied her, noting the subtle tension in her shoulders, the precision in her stance. She was trained for situations like this, to be calm under scrutiny, to answer nothing, yet reveal enough to prevent suspicion. I understand, she said finally, her voice steady, that some things are above my clearance to explain, sir. Halle leaned back, folding his hands in front of him. Not just above clearance. Some things I suspect even I am not meant to know. But I need context. I need to understand why a sailor of your experience, with your background, is assigned to my missile-loading crew. She looked at him directly now, unwavering. With respect, Admiral, my assignment here is operational. I follow orders. Hollow orders. Halle studied her eyes. There was no lie in them. No flinch. But there was something she wasn't telling. Something she had been trained to protect, regardless of who asked. He could sense the layers beneath the surface, the discipline, the intelligence, and the latent power that came with her background. Petty officer, he said carefully, I'm not questioning your loyalty. I'm questioning placement. You've handled classified operations before. I know that. Thunderbird, perhaps. The name made her pause fractionally. Just a fraction. Hyle noticed it instantly. Her posture did not change, but the subtle tightening of her jaw betrayed recognition. She chose her words carefully. I am aware of classified programs, sir. But my current assignment is different. My duty is here. Halle let the silence stretch. It was a test. He was testing her composure, her willingness to reveal without violating orders, her ability to acknowledge him without fully explaining. The room felt charged, every second heavy with unspoken understanding. You are not a regular sailor, he said slowly. I know that now. You have skills, training, and experience that are hidden from this crew. That patch, he gestured, subtly to her shoulder, is not decorative. You are embedded for a reason. I need to understand what that reason is, or at least why you are here under my command. She shifted slightly, but did not avert her gaze. Admiral, some missions are meant to be invisible. The fewer who understand them, the safer they are. And if someone notices? Halle asked, leaning forward slightly. What if something goes wrong? What if the wrong person sees? She exhaled, just barely, and tilted her head. Then the mission must proceed regardless. That is the nature of certain operations. Halle considered her words. There was no arrogance, only certainty. He realized she was trained to operate in isolation, to maintain her cover at all costs, even under scrutiny from the highest-ranking officers. The thought unsettled him. He had always relied on transparency in his command, trust, communication. Now he realized that not all trust could be earned in a traditional chain of command. Some people carried authority that bypassed hierarchy entirely. He stood, pacing slowly around the office, thinking aloud. So you're here, in plain sight, performing ordinary duties while maintaining hidden capabilities. Yes, sir. Her voice was quiet, unwavering. It is my role to ensure readiness and security in ways that may not be immediately visible. My placement is deliberate. Halle paused, thinking about the implications. And your mission? Is it connected to this fleet? Or is it broader? Her expression did not falter. Admiral, I follow orders. That is all that can be said. Safely. He exhaled. That was all he expected, in a way. She was not going to reveal operational details. And yet, Even in the constraints of her response, he could read enough. She was capable of more than anyone else aboard his command. She was a force hidden behind ordinariness, a weapon in human form. The conversation ended without a conclusion. Hale allowed her to leave, noting how she moved with the same quiet precision as she had on the deck. Each step was deliberate, each gesture controlled, signaling a discipline far beyond her apparent rank. He knew she would not reveal more, unless directly ordered by someone higher than him, a situation he could not yet control. Once she left, Hal returned to his desk. He considered the paths available. He could ignore the patch and her past, maintain the fleet's routine, and hope nothing surfaced that required intervention. Or he could observe, study, and wait, gathering clues until her true purpose revealed itself. He chose the latter. Hale leaned back in his chair, eyes scanning the deck through the blinds. Crew members moved efficiently below, unaware of the tension in their admiral's office, unaware of the silent presence walking among them, carrying secrets they could not imagine. Reyes was a mystery wrapped in ordinariness, and Hale now understood the stakes. She was here to protect the fleet, but not in ways anyone aboard could recognize. As dusk fell over the base, Hale made a mental note to monitor her closely, to watch the subtle movements, the choices, the interactions. Every action might be a signal, every gesture a clue to understanding why someone of her caliber had been assigned under his command without his knowledge. And somewhere deep in the shadows of the fleet, Hale realized that what appeared routine might conceal operations that could determine not just the outcome of an exercise, but potentially the security of his command and beyond. He lit a cigar, rare in his quarters, and watched the orange glow of the horizon fade. The patch on her shoulder was more than fabric. It was a signal, a warning, a story. Hale knew he had noticed something that day that might change everything. And he understood one undeniable truth. He could no longer view this fleet, or any mission aboard it, as ordinary. Carla Reyes had entered his command as a missile loader, quiet and unassuming. But that single patch, seen at a glance, told him she carried a legacy of power, secrecy, and potential danger. And Hale knew in his bones that the moment he had noticed, it marked the beginning of a reckoning whose outcome was yet unknown. The morning began like any other on the deck of the USS Vanguard. The sun rose over the horizon, painting the steel-gray surfaces with a faint orange glow. Sailors scurried across the flight deck and missile bays, their boots clanging in rhythm with the machinery. Hale stood on the command walkway, his eyes scanning the crew, but his attention kept drifting to the figure of Petty Officer Carla Reyes. She moved with the same calm precision he had noted before, adjusting harnesses, checking torque on missile clamps, issuing quiet, clear instructions. Every motion was efficient, deliberate, and controlled. Yet Hale could sense there was more than routine in her focus. The way she observed her surroundings, the subtle shift of her gaze as she scanned the deck, suggested a heightened awareness, a second layer of perception most sailors did not possess. As Hale considered the significance, an alert blared across the ship's communication system. The red warning lights in the operations center illuminated the deck like a warning beacon. The missile guidance systems were glitching, their data feeds flickering with anomalies. Officers shouted commands over radios. Systems were failing. The exercise, designed as a routine live-fire drill, had suddenly escalated into a potential disaster. Panic began to ripple through the control room. Junior officers scrambled to access terminals, flipping through error codes they didn't fully understand. Alarms echoed in the hall, metal clanging with the hum of overloaded circuits. Hale's pulse quickened. Something in the system had been compromised, and the fleet's operational readiness was in jeopardy. And then, as if rehearsed, Reyes stepped forward. She moved swiftly, yet without urgency, as though calmness itself was her weapon. Junior officers looked at her in surprise, unsure why a loader was approaching the control panels. She didn't pause to explain. She didn't need to. Hale observed silently from the walkway as she accessed the terminals, bypassing security protocols with hands that moved in a blur, entering sequences that no one else aboard the ship would have been authorized to touch. Hale felt a mixture of awe and unease. The same sailor who had been quietly moving Tomahawks now controlled the very systems that governed their launch. Every line of code she corrected, every lock she bypassed, stabilized the missile systems that mere minutes before had threatened to malfunction. Alarms still blared, but under her direction, the chaos slowly began to retreat. Status. Hale barked into his radio, moving closer to the operations center. "She's handling it," came the stunned reply. "Petty Officer Reyes is rerouting corrupted data. Systems are coming back online." Hale's jaw tightened. He had seen a lot in his career: cyberattacks, mechanical failures, human error. But what he was witnessing now went beyond his expectations of anyone aboard a ship, let alone someone officially assigned to missile loading. Reyes was a force hidden in plain sight. She worked silently, the rhythm of her movements precise, unerring. Crates on the deck seemed almost secondary to her focus. Hale watched her, struck by the duality of her role: a loader performing ordinary duties, and simultaneously a specialist restoring the heart of the ship's operational systems. His mind raced. If Thunderbird operatives were capable of this, it explained why her record had been redacted, why the patch on her shoulder had seemed so familiar. She was trained for crises the rest of the crew couldn't even imagine. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours. Sweat formed on Hale's brow as he observed every subtle motion. The crew below were now watching her, some uncertain, some impressed, some awed by the unassuming petty officer orchestrating the stabilization of systems that could have crippled the fleet. Hale could see the mental calculations in her eyes, the rerouting of guidance, the neutralization of corrupted nodes, the verification of missile locks. It was as if she were conducting an invisible symphony of code and hardware. Finally, the alarms ceased one by one. The lights in the operations center returned to their standard, calm green. A collective exhale seemed to ripple through the room. Systems were functional again. Missiles were operational. The exercise, which moments ago had teetered on the edge of disaster, was restored. Hale stepped into the operations center, moving toward her, his eyes never leaving hers. "Status report, Petty Officer," he said, trying to maintain calm, though his voice betrayed the tension that had gripped him. She looked up briefly, expression neutral. "Systems restored, sir. No residual corruption detected. Guidance recalibrated. Missile readiness confirmed." Hale nodded slowly. "Do you have any explanation for how this occurred?" Her gaze flickered briefly toward the deck, then returned to him. "It appears the data feed was compromised by an external source, sir. Precise origin not yet traceable. Contingency protocols engaged and restored functionality. Mission integrity maintained." Hale exhaled, impressed despite himself. "And you did all this without anyone noticing until now?" "Yes, sir," she said calmly, almost dismissively, as if it were routine. The officers in the room stared in disbelief. Hale's eyes, however, were locked on hers. The realization was unavoidable. She was operating at a level that transcended her official duties. And more importantly, she was hiding it under the guise of ordinariness. Hale motioned the crew to continue with the exercise. "Proceed as planned. All systems functional." "Good work, Reyes," he said, though his tone carried more weight than a simple compliment. As the crew dispersed to resume their duties, Hale remained behind, watching her pack up, checking torque on the missile mounts as though nothing extraordinary had happened. She was calm, focused, methodical, the very picture of routine. And yet, he had just witnessed something few officers would ever see. A hidden operative neutralizing a potentially catastrophic failure with precision, discretion, and mastery that left even him questioning the limits of her capabilities. When the operation subsided, Hale called a private aide into his office. "Observe her closely," he instructed. "I need a full assessment of her capabilities, training, and any anomalies in her past assignments. Do not approach her yet. Just report. Everything. Every detail." The aide nodded, recognizing the rare seriousness in Hale's voice. "Yes, sir." Hale turned back to the window, watching the sun climbing higher over the Pacific. The fleet was operational again, and the exercise could continue. Yet something fundamental had shifted. The petty officer assigned to load missiles was not just a loader. She was something else entirely, a hidden layer of capability embedded within the ordinary, a guardian operating beyond the eyes of even the highest-ranking officers. The incident left Hale with a deep, uneasy awareness. He had seen her do what no one else aboard the Vanguard could have managed. She had managed systems, neutralized a threat, and maintained control, all while remaining outwardly a regular crew member. And he knew, with certainty, that this was only the beginning. If an unexpected crisis could reveal her hidden abilities so suddenly, what other layers of her expertise had yet to surface? He felt a weight settle in his chest. Rhea's presence was no accident. Someone had placed her here with purpose. And if she could handle this crisis without alerting anyone, he could only imagine what other contingencies she was prepared for. Hale realized, fully and with a mixture of awe and apprehension, that his fleet was being safeguarded by someone operating in a sphere he had not yet begun to understand. As the day wore on, Hale remained vigilant. He watched her interactions, noting the subtle way she observed the deck, the technicians, even the junior officers. Every movement was precise, efficient, and controlled. She smiled briefly at a subordinate, issued instructions concisely, and returned to her task. No one else seemed to notice the extraordinary competence hidden beneath her routine duties. And Hale understood this now. The patch on her shoulder was not merely symbolic. It was a signpost, a declaration of skill, secrecy, and authority. And, for the first time, he realized that noticing it was not simply observation. It was recognition of something much larger, something that might determine the future safety and success of his entire fleet. The morning fog clung stubbornly to the steel decks of the USS Vanguard, blurring the horizon and dampening sound. The fleet, now fully operational, had resumed its live-fire exercises after the minor glitch the previous day. Hale observed from the command walkway, a cup of coffee in hand, eyes flicking constantly to the activity below. Everything appeared routine. Cranes moved, sailors adjusted equipment, and the hum of machinery filled the air. But Hale's instincts, honed over decades, whispered caution. Petty Officer Carla Reyes was in position as always, crouched beside a missile crate, checking torque on its clamps. Her eyes moved not just across her immediate task, but over the entire deck, scanning constantly. Hale knew she was aware of his gaze. Her calm, controlled posture belied a readiness that most officers couldn't detect, yet he could feel it. Then the alarm sounded. Red lights flashed across the operations center, accompanied by the shrill beeping of warning sirens. Hale's heart quickened. This time, the alert was not minor. The fleet's missile guidance systems were failing again, but far more severely than the previous incident. Screens flickered, target data scrambled, and multiple system nodes reported errors. Simultaneously, communications across the fleet crackled with tension as officers struggled to assess the situation. Hale's pulse hammered in his chest. He had suspected Reyes was more than a loader. Now he would see just how much. Reyes moved immediately, her actions deliberate but rapid. Junior sailors looked on in awe and confusion as she accessed terminals. She technically had no clearance for, fingers flying over the keyboard as she bypassed security protocols. Every command she entered was precise, measured, as though she had rehearsed it countless times. Alarms blared around her, but she worked calmly, almost invisibly. Hale's mind raced. This was no simple glitch or mechanical error. The data corruption was too coordinated, too exact. Someone had targeted the fleet directly, an external cyber attic aimed at crippling its strike capability. And here, in the middle of the chaos, Reyes was the only person capable of neutralizing it. She navigated the corrupted systems with ease, rerouting code, isolating compromised nodes, and restoring operational pathways. Officers tried to assist, but she waved them away, signaling that her methods required minimal interference. Hale watched, struck by the duality of her role. She was a loader, yet simultaneously the single point of salvation for the fleet. Her calm authority radiated, even without a title or rank to indicate the power she wielded. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours. The sirens blared, the lights flashed, and Hale could see the tension in the operations room escalate with every second. Yet Reyes worked without hesitation, her eyes scanning lines of code, her hands moving in a rhythm that made the chaos seem almost ordered. Finally, she isolated the source of the attack, a subtle but sophisticated intrusion in the missile guidance network. Hale realized with a mix of awe and unease that this was the kind of operation Thunderbird specialists had been trained to counter. Reyes had neutralized the threat not with brute force, but with surgical precision. The compromised nodes were contained, and the systems began to stabilize. Hale called over the comms. "Status, Petty Officer." His voice carried authority, but there was an undertone of disbelief. "Systems stabilized, sir. Intrusion neutralized. No residual corruption detected." "Fleet operational," she replied without hesitation, her voice calm, almost casual, as though resolving a cyber attic was an everyday task. Hale exhaled, his chest heavy with realization. The same sailor he had first noticed for a patch on her shoulder was now the central figure preventing potential catastrophe. She moved among ordinary sailors, blending seamlessly, yet her knowledge, skill, and presence were extraordinary. He studied her closely as she continued working, double-checking system integrity, rerouting minor errors, and verifying missile readiness. Every movement was precise, controlled, deliberate. Her focus never wavered. Every gesture, every glance across the deck, reflected awareness and anticipation. Hale understood now. She wasn't just operating systems. She was reading the environment, predicting contingencies, acting before threats fully materialized. The junior officers and sailors around her were unaware of the true scale of her capabilities. To them, she was a diligent loader ensuring missiles were ready for launch. To Hale, she was the hidden guardian of the fleet, a covert operative executing a mission that was invisible to everyone else. Once the immediate crisis was over, Hale finally approached her, his steps deliberate, echoing across the deck. The crew resumed routine tasks, though whispers of her skill began to circulate quietly among those who had observed her. Hale's eyes never left hers as he drew near. "Petty Officer Reyes," he said quietly, keeping his tone measured. "You just neutralized a fleet-level cyber attic that could have compromised every missile aboard this ship. Explain yourself." Her expression remained calm, composed. "Sir, mission parameters dictate discretion. My objective was to restore operational integrity. No further explanation can be provided safely." Hale nodded slowly, absorbing her words. She would not reveal her full role, not yet, and she had no obligation to. Yet the incident confirmed everything he had suspected. The patch on her shoulder was not decorative. It represented training, authority, and access to operations far beyond what anyone aboard the ship, including him, had been aware of. He gestured for her to step aside. "Continue with your duties," he said, though his voice carried the weight of command, respect, and something else, caution. "I will be monitoring. And petty officer, know this. Your abilities have just become crucial to my understanding of the fleet's security. Every action you take from this point forward will be observed carefully." Reyes inclined her head slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement without revealing more than necessary. She returned to her work, torquing bolts and checking missile alignment, as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. The duality of her presence was staggering. Ordinary on the surface, extraordinary in function. Hala stepped back onto the command walkway, watching her. He felt a mixture of awe, respect, and unease. The incident was a stark reminder that appearances could deceive, that competence could be hidden beneath the most mundane tasks, and that the security of his fleet might depend entirely on the actions of a single, covertly trained individual. The sun climbed higher, burning off the fog, revealing the vast Pacific expanse surrounding the ship. Hale knew that today had been only the first real test of her capabilities. If the fleet could face such a subtle, sophisticated attack once, it could face it again, perhaps under circumstances even more dangerous. And he also understood that the full scope of Rey's skills and the mission behind that lightning bolt eagle patch had yet to reveal itself completely. For the first time, Hale realized that his role as Admiral had changed. He could no longer view the exercise as a routine drill. He could no longer assume that every sailor fit into the roles they had been assigned. And most importantly, he now understood that Reyes was not just a loader, not just a sailor, but a force operating in plain sight, capable of averting disasters that would have crippled the fleet if left unchecked. Hale's mind returned repeatedly to that patch, the emblem that had first drawn his attention. It was a symbol, a marker, a warning, and a promise. He had seen it once, in a classified briefing nearly a decade earlier, and he had remembered it because it meant something no ordinary sailor could achieve. Today he realized the patch had marked her as a hidden guardian, a living extension of a program that no longer existed in name but lived on in practice. The day ended with the fleet operational, the exercise continuing without further incident. Yet Hale's mind remained restless. He knew that observing Reyes, understanding her, and preparing for the unknown would be a central part of his command from this day forward. And he also knew that, in some ways, he was no longer merely overseeing a fleet. He was overseeing a secret within it, one that had the power to protect or destabilize everything under his authority. The night settled over the USS Vanguard like a heavy, silent blanket, the vast Pacific stretching into darkness beyond the ship's steel hull. Hale remained on the command walkway long after the last drills had concluded. Lights glimmered across the deck, faint shadows shifting as sailors moved quietly in post-exercise checks. But Hale's focus was not on the routine. His thoughts were consumed by Petty Officer Carla Reyes, her calm precision, her uncanny competence, and the patch on her shoulder that had first drawn his attention. The events of the past few days played relentlessly in his mind. The anomalies in her record, the 2 years of redacted operations, and most recently, the crisis she had neutralized without so much as a ripple in the fleet's overall function. Hale understood that the patch was no ordinary emblem. It was a symbol of expertise, of secrecy, and of authority that transcended conventional command structures. But beyond that, it was a message, a signal to those who knew to recognize it. Hale returned to his quarters and pulled open a secure terminal. Every public record, every accessible personnel database, even classified archives for prior operations, offered fragments but no clarity. Then he remembered something, an old brief from years ago, a memory that had been lodged in the back of his mind until now. Thunderbird. He had been a captain at the time, attending a Pentagon briefing that seemed distant, almost abstract, until today. The program had been shrouded in secrecy, with directives so classified that even the highest-ranking officers had been cautioned to avoid any mention of it. Operatives were embedded in fleets, consulates, and even civilian sectors, working invisibly to neutralize threats before they escalated. Hale opened a new notebook and began connecting dots. The redacted years in Reyes' record coincided with the last known operations of Thunderbird. The patch she wore, the lightning bolt splitting the eagle, matched the symbol he had seen in that long-forgotten briefing. And the precision with which she had neutralized the cyber-attic on the fleet confirmed that she had undergone training far beyond that of any ordinary sailor. He reviewed the sequence of her actions during the crisis, analyzing every gesture, every command she had executed. Her movements were not just operational, they were anticipatory. She had predicted system failures before they fully manifested, neutralized threats before junior officers even recognized them, and restored operational capacity with a calmness that bordered on instinctual. Hale realized that Thunderbird's operatives were not merely technicians or combat specialists. They were strategists, psychologists, and codebreakers all in one, capable of influencing outcomes without anyone realizing their presence. Hale's mind raced. If Reyes was here, embedded in his fleet under the guise of routine, it was not merely coincidence. Someone had placed her with intent, and the implications were staggering. Was she here to observe, to protect, or to intervene in a mission only visible to a select few? And if so, what threat had been anticipated that required her presence? He pushed back from the desk and paced the room, the weight of command pressing down on him. The fleet was operational, yet he knew that the visible calm of the deck masked a web of potential threats. Reyes was a node within that web, and the full scope of her mission remained obscured. Hale understood now that the safety of his command might not only depend on routine procedures and training, it might hinge entirely on her hidden actions. The next morning, Hale observed her again from the walkway. Reyes moved efficiently among the crew, checking missile clamps, supervising junior sailors, and issuing quiet instructions. Her presence was both ordinary and extraordinary. He noticed a subtle pattern. Her gaze constantly shifted, scanning not only the immediate deck, but also the edges of operations, the flow of data, and the behavior of personnel. She was reading the environment, predicting movements, and making adjustments before anyone else realized they were necessary. Hale called his aide to his side. Observe her. Document everything, every action, every decision, every interaction. We need a complete profile of her operational methods. I want to know how she thinks, how she acts under pressure, and how she influences outcomes without anyone realizing it. Yes, sir, the aide replied, noting the seriousness in Hale's voice. Hale watched as Reyes crouched beside a missile crate, checking torque on its clamps, then paused, raising her head slightly as if listening. A junior sailor approached with a question, and she responded with concise, exact instructions, her tone calm but authoritative. Hale noted the subtle efficiency in her gestures, the precision of her commands, and the way her attention shifted seamlessly from immediate tasks to peripheral observation. Every motion was measured, every glance calculated. She was a force of nature contained within the form of an ordinary sailor. Later that day, an encrypted message arrived at Hale's secure terminal, an anomaly he noticed immediately. The source was indirect, routed through multiple nodes to obscure origin. The content was minimal, coordinates and a time with no context. Hale recognized the signature instantly, not from the message itself, but from the coding style, the rhythm, the spacing. It was a method he had encountered only once, during his early exposure to Thunderbird protocols. The message was intended for Reyes. Hale felt a chill. He realized that whatever operation was unfolding, he was witnessing only the surface. Reyes' presence, the patch on her shoulder, the anomalies in her record, and now this encrypted signal all pointed to a mission beyond anything he had previously encountered in his career. He understood, with clarity, that she was not merely reacting to events. She was part of a larger, coordinated operation whose objectives were hidden from him and possibly everyone aboard the fleet. That evening, Hale approached her privately. On the deck, the sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving a dim glow over the ship's steel surfaces. Reyes was alone, crouched beside a missile crate, performing checks. Her posture was relaxed, yet Hale sensed readiness in every movement. "Petty Officer Reyes," he began quietly, "I need to understand more about your role here." She looked up, expression calm, controlled. "Sir? Your record, your skills?" "The patch on your shoulder. It's clear to me now that you are embedded for a purpose beyond loading missiles. I need to know, as much as you can safely disclose, what that purpose entails." Her eyes flickered briefly, a micro-expression of acknowledgement, then returned to calm neutrality. "Admiral, my assignment is operational security. I monitor, anticipate, and intervene when necessary. Specific directives are classified. Full disclosure could compromise both mission and personnel." Hale nodded slowly. "I understand. But the recent events, the anomalies, the attacks, they are not routine. Your actions prevented disaster. I need to know how I can support you while ensuring the fleet remains safe." Reyes considered him for a moment. "Your role is command. Observing, coordinating, and providing overall authority. My role is intervention. It is deliberately invisible. Success depends on discretion, coordination, and trust, even when not verbalized." Hale exhaled, absorbing the weight of her words. He understood now that his role as Admiral had shifted. He was no longer merely overseeing a fleet. He was responsible for supporting a covert operative whose actions, hidden from view, could determine the outcome of critical operations. The encrypted message she had received earlier now made sense. It was a signal, a directive, or perhaps a warning. Hale did not yet know the full scope, but he understood the principle. Her mission extended beyond the fleet, beyond the exercise, and possibly beyond the limits of what he had thought possible. He observed her work silently, noting every motion, every glance, every interaction. Reyes was a study in control and anticipation, a living instrument of precision. Hale realized that her training had honed her not just for crisis management, but for reading environments, predicting outcomes, and neutralizing threats with discretion. She was simultaneously ordinary and extraordinary, visible yet invisible, a hidden axis around which security and success rotated. As night deepened, Hale returned to his quarters, thoughts racing. He began drafting contingency plans, not just for the fleet's operational exercises, but for the unknown variables surrounding Rey's presence. He understood fully now that her mission and her abilities were crucial to the fleet's security. He could anticipate some threats, but not all. And he knew, with a mixture of awe and unease, that he would need to rely on her in ways that defied conventional command structures. For Hale, the realization was both thrilling and terrifying. The patch on her shoulder was no mere symbol. It was a signal to those who understood, a marker of authority, skill, and discretion that had protected countless operations in the past and would continue to do so under his command. He understood finally that noticing it had changed everything. Carla Reyes, the seemingly ordinary missile loader, was anything but ordinary. She was a guardian, a covert operative, and a force embedded within the fleet, ready to act when circumstances demanded it. Hale knew that the coming days would test him, the crew, and her, in ways he could not yet predict. But he also knew one undeniable truth. He had glimpsed only the surface of her mission, and the depths would reveal themselves in time. The pre-dawn sky over the Pacific was painted in muted shades of gray, streaked with the faintest glimmers of light. The USS Vanguard cut silently through the waves, a vessel of steel and precision. Hale stood on the command walkway, eyes scanning the horizon, but his focus remained on the deck below. This morning, unlike any other, the air held tension, a weight that pressed down on every sailor aboard. Carla Reyes moved along the deck with calm authority, inspecting missile crates and communicating quietly with junior personnel. Every gesture, every glance reflected her usual precision. Yet today, Hale sensed something different, a heightened intensity, a subtle urgency barely perceptible to anyone else. He could feel it in the way she adjusted her stance, the way her eyes flicked constantly across the deck, taking in every detail of machinery, personnel, and environment. Then the alarm sounded. Red lights flashed, sirens blared, and the operations center erupted in controlled chaos. A threat had been detected, a sophisticated, coordinated attempt to compromise the fleet's missile systems. This time, it was not a glitch, nor a minor cyber intrusion. It was a deliberate, multi-layered attack designed to penetrate every operational node simultaneously. Hale's pulse quickened. He had anticipated challenges, but this was beyond routine. Reyes reacted instantly. She moved with fluidity, crouching at a terminal while issuing precise instructions to crew members. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, bypassing security protocols with skill that seemed almost preternatural. Junior officers stared, unsure how to respond, while she orchestrated the stabilization of systems that were moments away from failure. Hale felt a mixture of awe and unease. He had observed her before, had seen her prevent crises, but this was on an entirely different scale. She was not only neutralizing the threat, she was anticipating its next moves, rerouting compromised nodes, and securing the fleet's operational capacity with a deftness that left him questioning what he thought possible. Minutes passed in. Tense silence, punctuated only by the beeping of alerts and the murmur of controlled communications. Reyes worked methodically, almost invisibly, yet her influence radiated outward. Hale noted the subtle micro-adjustments she made, rerouting power flows, recalibrating missile guidance systems, verifying launch sequences, all executed with calm, meticulous efficiency. She was operating at the intersection of technical mastery, strategic insight, and situational awareness that few could achieve. Hale called over the comms. Petty Officer Reyes, status. Threat neutralized, sir. Systems stabilized. All operational nodes secure? No residual compromise detected, she replied, her voice steady and unshaken. Hale exhaled, a tension he had not realized he'd held releasing slowly. The crew around her began to regain composure, whispers of admiration spreading quietly among junior sailors. But Hale's focus never wavered from Reyes. He realized now that her presence was the linchpin of the fleet's security, her hidden abilities the only barrier between operational disaster and catastrophe. He approached her on the deck, his steps deliberate. Petty Officer, he said quietly, keeping his voice calm despite the adrenaline still coursing through him. Explain yourself, now as much as you can disclose safely. Reyes stood, her posture perfectly composed. She glanced at him, the faintest acknowledgement in her eyes, then returned to a calm, neutral expression. Sir, she began, my assignment is covert. I am embedded to monitor, anticipate, and neutralize threats that cannot be detected by standard protocols. Full disclosure could compromise ongoing operations. Hale nodded slowly. I understand. But you just prevented what could have been a fleet-wide disaster. Your skills, your decisions saved countless lives and critical assets. I need to know how I can support you while maintaining operational integrity. Her gaze flickered toward him, briefly unguarded. Trust, Admiral, she said quietly, is the only support necessary. Observing, coordinating, and allowing intervention where needed ensures mission success. My presence alone is insufficient without awareness from command. Hale exhaled, absorbing the weight of her words. She was not just a sailor or a loader. She was an operative with the skill, authority, and autonomy to act decisively, invisible yet indispensable. The patch on her shoulder, once a curious emblem, now represented an entire legacy of covert training, strategic mastery, and hidden power. He watched as she returned to her duties, checking systems, verifying missile readiness, and issuing concise instructions. Every movement was calculated, purposeful, and deliberate. Hale realized that her training extended beyond technical skill. It included environmental awareness, human psychology, and threat anticipation, all integrated seamlessly into her actions. The encrypted message she had received days earlier now made sense. It was a directive, signaling a critical operation and potential threat. Hale had glimpsed only the surface of her mission. Now he understood that the real work was ongoing, that her presence, the patch, and the redacted years in her record were part of a strategy designed to protect assets and personnel beyond the reach of ordinary command structures. As night descended fully, a new alert sounded smaller, subtler, but unmistakably dangerous. Hale and Reyes exchanged a glance that conveyed understanding without words. She moved instantly, bypassing junior officers, and engaged a system-level countermeasure that neutralized a covert intrusion before it could escalate. Hale's admiration deepened, but so did his apprehension. He understood now that the USS Vanguard was not merely a vessel of steel and ordnance. It was a stage for covert operations orchestrated by individuals whose skill transcended conventional understanding. Reyes was central to this hidden framework, her abilities a critical safeguard against threats most could not even perceive. Hours later, the fleet was secure. Systems were verified, missile readiness confirmed, and all personnel accounted for. Hale stood on the deck, watching the calm after the storm, the soft lapping of waves beneath the hull, and the quiet, almost imperceptible work of Reyes as she returned to routine checks. She was the embodiment of duality, ordinary yet extraordinary, visible yet unseen, silent yet decisive. Finally, Hale approached her. "Petty Officer Reyes," he said, voice steady, "I now understand the full scope of your presence. You are not here merely as a loader. You are embedded to safeguard this fleet, its personnel, and its mission, often invisible to all but those who recognize your expertise." She nodded slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement, then returned to her routine without hesitation. "Sir," she said softly, "my mission is complete when no one notices it. That is the measure of success." Hale exhaled deeply, feeling the weight of command and understanding settle into a new dimension. He had spent decades leading, strategizing, and overseeing operations. But now he realized that leadership involved not only command of visible forces, but recognition of hidden ones, individuals whose presence was subtle, whose skills were extraordinary, and whose discretion was absolute. The patch on her shoulder was more than fabric. It was a testament to her training, a signal of hidden authority, and a reminder that the safety of his fleet depended on the unseen. Hale knew that from this day forward, the USS Vanguard would never be the same in his eyes. He would view every mission, every drill, and every decision through a lens sharpened by the knowledge that some forces operate in the shadows, carrying power far beyond what appearances suggest. The night ended quietly. Hale returned to his quarters, replaying every moment in his mind. The fleet was operational, secure, and ready for the challenges ahead. Yet he knew that the real work, Ray's work, was ongoing, hidden beneath layers of ordinary routine. He understood the full gravity of her abilities and the mission she served. And he knew, unequivocally, that noticing the patch had changed everything. Carla Reyes, the unassuming loader, was no longer just a sailor. She was a guardian, a covert operative, and a force embedded within the fleet, prepared to act decisively when circumstances demanded it. Hale understood now that her presence, her skills, and her discretion were vital not just for today, but for the future of the fleet and every mission it undertook. And as the first light of dawn broke over the Pacific horizon, Hale watched her work quietly, aware that he had witnessed not just extraordinary skill, but the embodiment of secrecy, strategy, and unwavering competence, a force hidden in plain sight, whose true impact would shape every mission to come.